As Lane Kiffin nears a decision, we've got the latest. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. And thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. So Friday ended up being quite an eventful day in the history of LSU football. As LSU continues its pursuit of Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss Rebels played the Egg Bowl. They won emphatically over Mississippi State. And so the question now remains, will Lane Kiffin stay at Ole Miss, or will he leave a team bound for the college football playoff for its in-conference rival, LSU? I'll tell you what I know, and we'll run through not only this, but also what may be transpiring here in the next day, 24, 48 hours or so, as far as I understand it right now on Friday night as we record. So it is very fair to say, if I kind of play out the timeline, that a week ago, LSU was supremely confident that Lane Kiffin was going to be its next head coach. If you're an everydayer, shout out and thank you, but I'll play out the timeline. I'll give you the Cliff's Notes that 2 Mondays ago, Angela Kiffin visited Baton Rouge. Throughout that entire week, Lane Kiffin sought the counsel of people he trusted, among them Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Jimmy Sexton. They all steered him toward LSU over Florida. By the end of last week, by Friday, the terms of his contract at LSU were leaked. For all intents and purposes, there was a deal in place to be had. LSU was the choice over Florida. A deal was in place. The terms of the contract were disclosed. You can read between the lines at this point. And for LSU, the point or the objective then was sweat out a week, because you don't have a deal done until you have something binding that is signed, and you didn't have that. So as this week went along, as Ole Miss was getting ready for the Egg Bowl and Lane Kiffin was with his team, and Ole Miss, as I understand it, worked very hard. Instead of focusing on new candidates to replace Lane Kiffin, they worked on trying to convince Lane Kiffin to stay. And so maybe some of that prolonged this process. And it got to Friday, where Ole Miss played Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl and won a game emphatically, and for all intents and purposes, punched their ticket to the college football playoff. And from the LSU perspective, that was very unsettling, because what you wanted was Ole Miss to lose that game to make it a very easy decision for Lane Kiffin, because they would have blamed the loss on Kiffin and he would have been out the door. But the more they win, the harder this decision could become, because as we've said here over and over again, Lane Kiffin wants to leave Ole Miss to coach LSU. I have no problem saying this emphatically. He wants to leave Ole Miss to coach LSU, but he wants to coach his team in the college football playoff. And they are not going to allow him to do that, as we've said over and over and over again. So the more they win, the more complicated this has become. And so I think from an LSU perspective, the biggest concern would have been an emotional moment from Lane Kiffin, meaning you're around your team, you have this win, you're 11-1, you're going to the college football playoff. Maybe Lane looks around and says, what am I doing? Of course I'm staying here. I've been here for 6 years. I've changed my life here. My family's here. I recruited these players. First 11-win season in the history of Ole Miss football. We're going to the college football playoff. Of course I want to be here. And what did Lane Kiffin say postgame?
Lane, Keith released that statement last week saying that there's going to be an announcement by tomorrow on your future. Have you made any sort of decision yet?
Yeah, I haven't. Maybe that surprised you. But I guess, I gotta do some praying and figure this thing out. I know today, I can get to that tomorrow. I live life about one day at a time. Maybe that doesn't help you, but I've learned to live that way for about 6 years now, 5 years, and that helps me. And so today was all about these players performing really well and keeping this Egg Bowl trophy where it belongs. And then, tonight I'm going to go be a dad and watch more important game to me and watch Knox playing the North Division or North State Championship versus Tupelo tonight. So
still can't give an answer. I wanted to play that for you so I can contrast this. You've heard this before, but this was Dan Lanning on the Rich Eisen show when asked about interest in other jobs.
Yeah, I'm not leaving Oregon. Yeah, as long as I win. That's what I always tell my kids. Yeah. Right? If your dad wins, we'll be at Oregon. So I gotta win. Right? That's how it changes.
Lane Kiffin looks pained. Asked about this. Again, put yourself in the context of the moment. Ole Miss just polished off an 11-1 season. They beat their rival. They punched their ticket to the college football playoff. The SEC championship is still in play. This should be a moment of elation. Of course you're going to coach your team. And Lane Kiffin looks the opposite of elated.
Do you plan on making a decision tomorrow?
I feel like I got to. Probably not as enjoyable as people probably think it is, but like Kirby says, when he wants to complain about being in the national championship and missing the portal window, it's like there's no crying from the yacht. So I'm not trying to get pity, but it's not as enjoyable as maybe some people would think.
Does winning today and making the playoff make it more difficult to win?
I think it's difficult no matter what. I think that there is a relief that we played like I thought I thought they would today. I did think they would play like this, and but you never know. And so I am relieved for that, because if we didn't play well today, we all know what the storyline would be. It'd be my fault for having them distracted and stuff. So I'm really glad that we proved that narrative, which is a fair narrative for people to write. And I think a lot of our fans felt that way this week. Understandable, but they don't know our room and they don't know how we train them and how they think.
I mean, the question at the very beginning, Lane, you're going to make a decision. I think I've got to. You can just tell this man is leaving Ole Miss. All of the emotion, like if from an LSU perspective, the feeling would have been the fear, the anxiety would have been Lane gets caught up in the emotion of the win and says, what am I doing? Of course I'm staying, signs the extension. He didn't do that. He did the opposite of that on Friday after the game. And as Friday went along, I can tell you that confidence only grew in LSU circles from people I spoke with, and confidence waned in Ole Miss circles from people I spoke with. I'm telling you, firsthand conversations I had. Folks associated with LSU, as the day went along, it was not very confident early. As the day went along, that confidence rose, and the opposite is true from people in Ole Miss circles. And this was a part of it as well. Lane in his postgame was asked, are there people he would lean on for advice in this decision? Give a listen.
I do. I miss my dad on this. I really missed him this week. And so, my two calls will be the closest to that from advice, what my dad would say to do on these things. And that'll be Coach Carroll and Coach Saban. Kind of wish when you had things to do in life that your dad wasn't there, or your dad was there. But this is what it is.
Pete Carroll and Nick Saban. By the way, Nick Saban is one of the people who was a driving force behind Lane Kiffin picking LSU over Florida a week ago. In a strange twist in this plot summary, Saban, who led LSU to a national championship and then became LSU's biggest adversary now may end up being an ally. It's almost like the Darth Vader story in a weird way. But Saban may end up being one that pushes Kiffin toward LSU in this situation. Now, remember, Keith Carter last Friday said that Lane Kiffin, actually, I'll put it here on the screen for those watching. If you're listening, I'll read it. But the statement Keith Carter released last Friday said the final line, quote, "An announcement on Coach Kiffin's future is expected the Saturday following the game." So he put the timeline on it. Lane Kiffin, in this bite we just played for you, said he's got to make a decision. And as I understand it, Keith Carter is going to hold Lane Kiffin's feet to the fire on Saturday and make him make a decision. Now, that's complicated because here on Friday, Texas beat Texas A&M. And it's so interesting because now Ole Miss is in the running for the SEC championship game, first in their history. If Auburn upsets Alabama in the Iron Bowl, Ole Miss is going to the SEC championship game. But you heard Lane Kiffin say it there. He's got to make a decision. And Keith Carter is going to hold Lane Kiffin to making a decision. And that decision, I think, at this point now, is going to be that Lane Kiffin is leaving Ole Miss and is going to be the LSU coach. It's something that I thought a week ago. It's something that started to trend throughout last week up into Friday with supreme confidence through last weekend and the beginning of this week. Waned a little bit, and certainly into Friday, confidence from the LSU standpoint was low. But that clearly on Friday night has flipped into now LSU feeling supremely confident that Lane Kiffin is, in fact, going to end up being the LSU football coach. Now, again, I'll give you the caveat I've given over and over and over and over and over again throughout every one of these episodes we've done, which is until the ink is dry on a binding agreement, it is not done. Until the coach is standing at the podium, it's not done. But Lane Kiffin standing at a podium in Baton Rouge on Monday seems more and more likely with every passing minute. Now, what does that mean potentially for staff changes and the rest of the SEC as this coaching carousel spins? I have some thoughts on that. We'll touch on that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift. And Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to their door. And this week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. Honestly, it's the kind of gift that brings people together and you don't even need to guess anyone's size. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So as Saturday rolled along and it seemed more and more likely that Lane Kiffin is in fact going to be the LSU coach, there's a domino effect that could very well happen. Now, I want to remind you, as we've talked about this, LSU's number 2 throughout this process was Eli Drinkwitz. Well, on Thanksgiving, Eli Drinkwitz agreed to an extension at Missouri. Now, as I was told, and again, this contract hasn't been approved by the Missouri Board of Curators, so there's nothing formal yet. But as I was told, the buyout in Drinkwitz's new contract did not change. So even though he signed an extension, he's still under the buyout terms of the old contract. So if a team wanted to jump up and make an attractive offer to Eli Drinkwitz, he could very well take it, but it would have to be the right offer. Now he's making now $10.5 million at Missouri, so that's unlikely that would happen. But that's one thing worth mentioning. But what it did also was removed another candidate from the coaching pool. So remember, James Franklin is at Virginia Tech. Morris has taken the job from North Texas at Oklahoma State. We've seen a lot of these things sort of transpire now. And what you've got, we've seen Clark Lee extend at Vanderbilt, Eli Drinkwitz extend at Missouri. So as we look at it, Auburn, Florida, and Ole Miss and LSU are all still open. That's 4, Arkansas as well, but Arkansas is fishing in a different pool. I'll talk about them in a second. Auburn, as I understand, John Cohen, their AD, is upsetting a lot of candidates because he is very bullish on DJ Durkin. The defensive coordinator is promoted to interim, and Cohen is sort of mandating that whoever the coach is retain DJ Durkin. Well, maybe Eli Drinkwitz wasn't bullish on retaining DJ Durkin, and so he backed out. I think that's one reason why Auburn is still vacant. Auburn was pushing for John Sumrall. I have no problem saying that. Auburn was pushing hard for John Sumrall, but Sumrall doesn't necessarily want to retain DJ Durkin and maybe thinks there's better options out there. So Auburn is still vacant. Ole Miss and LSU are volleying right now for Lane Kiffin. And it sure seems right now, at the time we're recording this, that Kiffin is, in fact, going to end up in Baton Rouge. Again, I'll give you the caveat. It's never done till it is. But play the hypothetical with me, okay? If Kiffin ends up in Baton Rouge and Ole Miss is open, one of the things that Ole Miss has done poorly is really push for its next coach. Because as they have sort of tried to placate Lane Kiffin, what they didn't do was get aggressive in seeking their next coach. So John Sumrall, who, remember, coached at Ole Miss in 2018, and as I understand, has fond memories of Ole Miss and would want to be there, they never got on a plane and went to see John Sumrall. They never put on a hard press. Well, Florida, when they were out of the Kiffin sweepstakes, which I told you they were, they pivoted to Sumrall. And so Sumrall and Florida are very close to having a deal in place, as I understand it, on Friday night. So if Sumrall ends up at Florida, and if Kiffin leaves Ole Miss for Baton Rouge, then Ole Miss is open. And what do? Is it Alex Golish from South Florida? Now, remember, there was the report earlier this week from some radio guy in Arkansas saying Golish had accepted the job at Arkansas. Now, nobody has confirmed that. That hasn't happened. And it seems like that was a premature report that is going to cost that guy whatever tiny amount of credibility he might have had, if he had any. But now you look around and you say, would Golish go to Arkansas? Would he pick Ole Miss? Auburn is still open as well. Could Auburn be a scenario where they just promote DJ Durkin, where, look, you have an AD there, and John Cohen, who is bullish on DJ Durkin? If Auburn beats Alabama in the Iron Bowl, don't be surprised if you see a world where DJ Durkin is promoted to the full-time head coach. So you could see a world where Durkin's the coach at Auburn, Sumrall's the coach at Florida, Kiffin's the coach at LSU, Alex Golish at Ole Miss. Then what does that leave for Arkansas with Morris already off the board and Golish going to Ole Miss potentially? It is a wild scenario that could unplay. But the first domino that's got to fall is what happens with Kiffin if, in fact, he does pick LSU on Saturday, as I suspect it's trending in that direction. And then I would expect, look, there's people at LSU that for about a week now, I've expected that Lane Kiffin would be in Baton Rouge on Monday. And maybe that means a plane picks him up on Sunday. It brings him to Baton Rouge, and on Monday he's introduced at a press conference. None of this is planned. There's no scheduled presser or anything like that, but you could sort of play the hypothetical out how it may work and how all this timeline may transpire. The other interesting part is if in fact Summerall does become the head coach at Florida, there's some talk in scuttle out of Florida that they might be interested in Blake Baker as their defensive coordinator. Remember, if Lane Kiffin becomes the LSU head coach, I'm not trying to confuse you, but follow me here. If Lane Kiffin becomes the LSU head coach, his defensive coordinator at Ole Miss is Pete Golding, who had been on Nick Saban's staff at Alabama with Kiffin. Golding is from Hammond. By the way, Golding, incredible recruiter. One of the reasons Alabama got so many players out of Louisiana, in particular Tangipahoa Parish, was Pete Golding. We talk about the Amit Barber. I get it, but Pete Golding was a big part of that as well. So Golding could come, which means you'd be looking for a defensive, or means Baker wouldn't be back as defensive coordinator. So I think there's one or two things that would happen for Baker. He would either potentially join Summerall at Florida as his defensive coordinator, or could potentially be Summerall's replacement at Tulane as their head coach. A year ago, when Summerall was in the mix for the North Carolina job that ultimately went to Bill Belichick, there was a lot of talk around Tulane that Baker would have been at or near the top of their list. So it stands to reason if Summerall leaves for Florida, that maybe Baker could be in the mix at Tulane. Also, don't sleep on the possibility of Summerall going to Ole Miss. But it feels very much like when Florida recognized they were out of the running for Lane Kiffin, they pivoted, and their pivot was to John Summerall. And Summerall and Florida apparently are very close to a deal being done for John Summerall to be the next coach at Florida. A report from Pete Thamel on Friday was that Summerall would make that announcement on Sunday. So could Ole Miss get in the mix? I don't know if it's too late. That's not for me to decide. I don't cover Ole Miss on a daily basis. My only concern is what happens with LSU. And it sure seems like Lane Kiffin is going to be the guy. And if, for some reason, Lane Kiffin sleeps on it, wakes up and decides he's going to stay at Ole Miss, where does LSU pivot? That's a good question, especially if Summerall to Florida is close to done. Summerall at Florida, Drinkwitz staying put at Missouri. Is Baker the next option? Could Kenny Dillingham be in the mix? It's a big question of where LSU would go if Lane Kiffin ends up having cold feet and doesn't pick LSU. But at this moment, at the time we're recording this on Friday night, a day that started with maybe confidence in Lane Kiffin coming to LSU waning, but as the day went along, it only elevated. It feels like Lane Kiffin will, in fact, be the next coach at LSU. But again, the caveat we always give, until the ink is dry on the contract and the coach is standing at the podium, it's not done. Seems like Saturday will be the day we finally get an answer on what it'll be. Will Lane Kiffin go do yoga at 6 a.m. and then have a meeting with Keith Carter after? Will it be a little later in the day? I don't know, but I think there's a good chance that even maybe before LSU tees up and kicks off at 2:30 against Oklahoma, we may have an answer to what Lane Kiffin's future will be. And at this point, I think it's going to be in Baton Rouge. As it develops, if anything changes, we'll let you know. So you'll want to be right here on Locked On LSU. So please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.